Welcome to Beyond the Box, where we discuss everything about Fort Irwin. I'm Colonel Jason Clark, your garrison commander and host.
And I'm Command Sergeant Major Larson, your Garrison Command Sergeant Major.
This week we have a special episode of Beyond the Box addressing a very serious subject of mental health, and in particular, suicide prevention. Suicide is a serious issue that affects our soldiers, our veterans, and our family members. The Army has designated this month, September, as Suicide Prevention Month in order to bring awareness and help our soldiers.
So recent statistics show that 22 vets a day are dying in this. Someone who is struggling. Personally, this is a very serious issue for me, as I have had far too many friends and people that I have served with either succumb to their suicidal ideations or have struggled with suicidal thoughts and depression. So I'm very excited we're doing this episode to help bring awareness, because you are the most important person in this fight, because you know them as family members, friends, and fellow soldiers, and can help them. I'm very excited about the show that we have coming up. We have some experts that the commander is about to introduce to you that are going to make this a great show and help with some resources.
That's right. So we have a few special guests today that are going to talk about how to cope with suicide prevention and people that might have struggled going through that, along with a mental health comedian, Mr. Frank King. Mr. Frank King actually conducted suicide prevention training with our soldiers here last week, and we're glad to have him on the show today. Mr. King is a 7-time TED talker and a comedian. He's a warrior in his own life. He's battled with depression and suicidal thoughts, and we're glad to have him here for some open conversation and discuss. Please enjoy the show. We will be back afterwards to answer any questions.
Good evening, everyone. My name is David Johnson. I'm the Suicide Prevention Program Manager over at ASAP. And this evening I have with me my esteemed guest, Mr. Frank King, the mental health comedian. Frank King is the author of Guts, Grit, and the Grind, a mental mechanics manual, basic mechanics.
That's the first book, Basic Mechanics. There's 4 books total. They're all sort of a chicken soup for the soul style anthology. Each book has 12 stories.
Okay.
12 guys.
Okay.
Because we surveyed guys, what do you want in a book on men's mental health?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, we want real guys, real stories, and how they're really coping. And we thought we'd be lucky to get 12 guys to come out and talk about things that are important,
Right.
things emotional.
Right.
Because guys don't, I was raised in the South. As you know, weren't you raised, David?
Here.
In California?
Yes.
Well, and it may have been this way in California when you were a kid, but then they said big boys don't cry. That's the way I was raised, and that's why we thought maybe we get 12 guys to come out. You know, we got 65 guys to come out. One book became 4 books.
Wow.
Yeah, each one with a story, a different problem: alcohol or substance abuse disorder, gambling addiction, bankruptcy, divorce, injured somehow in an accident, and how that changed their lives.
Awesome.
First 500 words is life is good. Second 500 words, life went bad. Last 500 words, here's how I'm coping. Hoping the guy would see his problem and then see what the other guy was doing and think, I could do that.
Right.
Because, see if this sounds familiar, fellas. Men take advice from men. My wife could give me a Nobel Prize winning idea, and I would poo-poo it. If the mailman told me the same thing, I'm all over it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we thought men take advice from men. That's what the genesis of the book.
So, I am really happy that you were able to come here for Suicide Prevention Month. You have a show that you're going to be doing, 2 shows. And so when you do those shows, what are you going to really focus on?
Well, the learning objectives, in a nutshell, is I teach people the signs and symptoms of depression, thoughts of suicide, what to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do, and how to find resources. And the reason I do that is that, and I tell them this after I give them the statistics, which are grim. One person dies of suicide in the U.S. every 9-10 minutes, around the world every 40 seconds, and hardly anybody talks about it. The good news is that 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal are ambivalent. roughly 9 out of 10 give hints in the last week leading up to an attempt, which means, and I'll say this to the audience, I like to empower the audience, make them the hero in the piece. I go, look, you can make a difference, you can save a life, and you can do it by doing something as simple as what we're doing right here, and that is starting the conversation if you know how to do that, and before I leave, I will teach you how to do that.
Interesting. Interesting.
And of course, I'll tell my personal story because everybody's wondering, hold on, a comedian talking about depression and suicide, how in the world does that work? And I tell my personal story, why I think I'm a good choice for. And it involves my family and my own close call with suicide. And yeah, David, there are more nuts in my family than in a squirrel turd. So it's going to be a little different than your average suicide prevention chat, I imagine.
Understood. And so I read where you used to do the blog for the Tonight Show.
Yes, wrote for Jay Leno for 20 years when he was just a permanent guest host. Johnny would pull up on a Friday night and go, I'm taking next week off, which meant Jay had 4 nights of monologues, 18 jokes per monologue to write over the weekend. So I'm on the road doing stand-up, as many people were. I kind of caught the comedy club wave in 1985. And my wife and I were on the road together for 2,629 nights in a row, nonstop.
Wow.
7 years and change. No home. She just came along for the ride. When I asked her, I go, I'm going to be a comedian. You want to come along for the ride? Thinking she'd go, heck no.
Yeah.
She goes, yeah. So, and somebody said to me, are you still with Wendy? Who divorces a woman like that? Come on, man. 7 years in comedy club? Anyway, what Leno did was, because he had to have all these jokes, all of a sudden, he hired road comics like me to fax in. So I would fax in 12 to 24 jokes a day when he needed them. And then when he got the Tonight Show for real, he let most of the contract labor go. But he kept some of us on. And so I stayed with him, sending in jokes, 12, 24 jokes a day, till he went to CNBC.
Okay, awesome.
And he's a great guy. I've had two aortic valve replacements, double bypass, heart attack, 3 stents. And my dad gave me a bad heart valve, my mom gave me the cholesterol of a deep fat fryer. So I'm in there for my first aortic valve replacement. I get out of ICU into a regular room. Well, phone rings. Another comedian's in the room with me. He picks it up, and what he hears is, hey, it's Jay Leno. Let me speak to Frank. And the comedian thought it was another comedian jerking him around.
Right.
So he goes, yeah, right, click. And who was that? And he goes, yeah, some comic impersonating Jay Leno. The phone rings again, and he picks it up. It really is Jay Leno. Can I speak? And he's like, oh, dear God, Frank, it's Jay Leno. So the first phone call I got when I got into a regular room was from Leno, and he goes, hey, man, heard you had heart surgery. Good thing you didn't have it in L.A. They'd take it out and leave it out. So, yeah, nice guy. And he did a blurb for our 4th book. I contacted him and said, Jay, look, we got a 4th book coming out. Would you do a blurb for the cover? And he did.
Okay. I know some years back he had came out of here because he's into cars.
Oh, you think?
Yeah, and he brought this, I don't know what type of car it is, but it's this big silver, looks like a big bullet.
Yeah.
And he drove that bad boy here. It was huge. Almost looked like a tank. So, but yeah, he seems like a really nice guy.
Yeah, and I think I saw on Jay Leno's garage on CNBC, I saw him driving a tank. Somehow, some way they had him in I don't know which tank it was, but, with somebody who knew what they were doing. But yeah, and he looked like he was having a ball. Oh, my Lord.
So I wanted to ask this question. When we talk about resiliency, is that something you feel we all have? We just have to find it, or?
Well, the Air Force, the wing wipers, have I think it's a program called Operation Resilience or Resiliency or something. And God bless them, their heart's in the right place. But I don't think they understand the suicidality. Somebody said to me, "You need to learn to be more resilient." I said, my most resilient friends are my most suicidal friends. Because if they weren't resilient, they wouldn't be here. They should be teaching. Yeah, I think the mistake people make, tell me, Dr. Darnell, if you agree, is that they equate, resilience and strength and dealing with mental illness, when a lot of times it's not a matter of strength or weakness. It's not a moral failing or a character flaw. It's something going on In my case, it's in my family. It's called generational depression and suicide. It's in my DNA. Some people it's just situational depression. You know, divorce, bankruptcy, maybe facing a court martial or something. I don't think it's a matter of strength or weakness. It's what's happening chemically, electrically, and in terms of moods in your brain. That's just my opinion.
Okay.
So, if I were going to teach anybody anything, I would teach them what we're going to teach them tomorrow.
Okay.
So that there's an outfit in Florida called Firewatch, which apparently is a military term. I guess you're outside a building and you're just making sure it doesn't catch fire.
Yeah,
And
you have I think it's called Fire Guard.
oh yeah, and what they do is they assign veterans to help other veterans in this organization because you're watching over other veterans. And I think that's what the key is knowing that somebody cares, and the person that cares knows what to say, what not to say, and how to help them find resources. So I really don't think it's a matter of resilience. Maybe for neurotypical people who are situationally depressed, maybe it is a matter of being resilient. It's like burnout. I'm not a big fan of burnout because what's happening is, and people celebrate, they go. I'm running on empty. Okay, those batteries need recharging. I think that may be killing us because there's nowadays I sleep only 3 hours a night. Oh no, please brag to me you sleep 8 hours a night.
Right.
I worry that there's this ethos, where this like I said, running on empty. One of my TEDx coaching clients is going to do a talk on how resiliency is killing us. You need to be less resilient and sleep more. Because what happens is, again, Dr. Darnell, correct me if you think I'm wrong, people often treat mental exhaustion as if it were a physical exhaustion. So they treat it the way they would if they'd been physically exhausted. But it's a different animal, that mental exhaustion, I believe. It's a little bit of a different animal. You need a little bit different ways to cope.
Right.
A self-care plan.
Right.
So anyway,
I just have one more question for you. How did you come up with the mental health comedian?
Well, I wish I could take credit for that. I have a young friend who, when I was just getting started with suicide prevention speaking, he was helping me with my websites. We were casting about for a URL. And he looks at me and goes, you know what? You're the mental health comedian. And man, I get chills now thinking about how good, I really like good writing, especially wordplay like that. And it's got the keywords mental health in there and comedian in there. And every now and then somebody says to me, do you not get booked because you're a comedian to speak on suicide? I go, no, you got it wrong. They want the lived experience, which I have. They want the learning outcomes, objectives. And if I can leaven that with a little bit of well-placed, tasteful humor. I crack. Yeah, I can tell you what the barrel of my gun tastes like. Literally, I can. Spoiler alert, I didn't pull the trigger. And you get this nervous laugh, like maybe we shouldn't be. And I go, oh no, it's okay to laugh. I said, a friend of mine saw me keynote recently, came up and goes, hey man, how come you didn't pull the trigger? I go, hey man, could you try to sound slightly less disappointed? So now they're really laughing. Now they understand that it's my stories, my anecdotes, so I think it really helps to digest and remember. And I like to move the audience from laughter to tears, back to laughter. I think if you can move them emotionally.
Right.
I was doing a show in New York City for the biggest construction company in the country, Turner Construction, in a building in Manhattan, 50-story building, on site. And I'm telling a story near the end of my speech, and the event planner said, two things are happening, Frank. One, I'm looking at them, looking at you, and not one of them is staring at their iPhone, which is apparently a metric. If you can get their faces out of their iPhone. And he said, when you tell the story of why you don't kill yourself and how your mom struggled to have a child and so forth, He said, I'm watching a guy sitting right next to me, big burly iron worker, and as the story finishes, he said, I watched and a tear, just one, rolled down the guy's face.
Mm.
He said, you moved him to tears, or to tear, but still for a tough guy like that, an iron worker, and here's the power of doing that, David. I was in Cincinnati, and on site, construction, 180 people, mostly men, did my talk. I'm up there being vulnerable, telling them I'm crazy, and I go, look, let's do some general Q&A, and then if you got a story you want to tell or something you want to share, but you don't want to share with everybody, I'll hang out and we'll do it individually. So there's half dozen guys, and one comes up, and another comes up. The last guy is a black gentleman, mid-20s, I'm guessing, and he's weeping in front of his cohorts, in front of 180 guys. And so I wait, and when he gathers himself, I go, what's up, man? He said, well, I've lost 3 people close to me in the last year to violence, including my daughter who died in my arms. Because I haven't slept in 2 days, I can't sleep, I work on the 5th floor of the building, and I'm thinking about jumping off every day. And it was the first time he'd ever said any of that to anybody.
Yeah.
But he felt like because I shared, he could share.
Right.
So I wave over the HR guy. I go, look, you need to take him by the hand, get him to a mental health facility, get him evaluated, and if necessary, medicated. So last week I called the meeting planner back holding my breath. How is... She goes, he was evaluated, he's medicated, he's back on the job. So that, I think that's the power of sharing a story like that with, because it allows them to share a similar story. And most of those conversations start like this. Frank, I've never told anybody this. Yeah, I get that a lot. But that's very rewarding, therapeutic for me. My goal is to save a life a day.
Right.
That's it. One life a day. I think maybe that day, maybe he was the guy that Here's one, and it's not the DSM. I have something called chronic suicidal ideation. And I've had clinicians go, what? Because it's not in the diagnostic and statistical manual, the big book of.
Right.
Yeah. So what it is for people like me, my tribe, the option of suicide is always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. I tell the audience, when I say small, my car broke down a couple of years ago. I had 3 thoughts. Unbidden. 1, get it fixed. 2, buy a new one. 3, I could just kill myself. And the audience, they'll titter. And I say, it's okay to laugh, and I know it's absurd. But I tell them, here's the deal. Every time I've told that story since 2014, almost every time, there's been at least one person in the audience who has chronic suicidal ideation.
Right.
They don't know it has a name.
Right.
They think they're just some kind of freak, completely alone. Had a young woman come up after a college keynote. She goes, thanks for your keynote. You're welcome. She goes, but I got to tell you, it made me weep. How did it make you weep? She goes, you know your story about the car? Get it fixed, buy a new one, kill yourself. I've been having those thoughts all my life. I didn't know that had a name. I thought I was some kind of freak and completely alone. And when I heard you say that out loud, I realized for the first time in my life, I'm not alone, and I wept. Oh, yeah, that's a little ROI. So that, again, is the benefit of simply starting people tell me things, David. I'm working a boat. I'm in a Lido buffet after a show the night before. I do stand-up comedy on cruises.
Okay.
Yeah, which is a great gig, by the way. It's 2 cruises, 2 shows a week, 7-day cruise. The rest of the time I'm just a passenger. And so I did my show, and I'm trying to find a seat in the Lido buffet for breakfast. I can't find a seat, and there's a woman, table for 2, empty chairs. So I point, she nods, I sit down. She looks up, she goes, "Hey, are you the comedian?" I said, "Hey, did you enjoy the comedy show?" She goes, "I did." I said, "Well, then I'm the comedian." She goes, "What would you have said if I told you I didn't like it? I'm an insurance guy from Des Moines." I look a lot like him, apparently. She goes, "Is comedy all you do on cruise? Is cruise comedy all you do?" I get that all the time. I go, "No, I'm a public speaker. And matter of fact, if you don't mind me bragging, I just nailed down my first TED Talk. The reason I did a TED Talk, guys, is because I've been a comedian for 2.5 decades when I started serious speaking. How can I convince somebody I can do something serious?"
Yeah.
So I did a TED Talk. I said, "I got a TED Talk." She goes, "I love TED Talks. What's the topic?" See, and I had this conversation many times up to this point. I'm thinking I know what's coming. So I said to her, as I looked into her eyes, depression and suicide started to count down in my head. 3, 2, 1. Sure enough, she goes, "Frank, I tried to kill myself twice. We have just met. She saw me on stage. We haven't traded 25 words. she's just revealed this to me. First time, not so serious. College, Second time, far more serious. I graduated college. I graduated medical school. I had the knowledge, had the equipment. I had the IV started in my ankle. Suicide cocktail on one hand, syringe in the other, getting ready to load it up. Phone rings. It's her 13-year-old son. She goes, I don't know if you heard something in my voice or had a premonition, but he said, Mom, don't do anything. So she said I didn't. I didn't give up on the idea of suicide, but I decided not to do it that day because I knew he'd always feel guilty. Wasn't there something he could do or say to stop my suicide? And I say to the audience, at that point, there are things you can do, there are things you can say. It's the most preventable cause of death on the planet. We'll cover those before I leave. I said to her at that point, how old is he now? She says 21. I said, does he know his phone call saved your life? She goes, no. How do you start that conversation? I thought, oh my Lord, you do a TED Talk. That became the theme of my TED Talk. And my speaking. Clients say to me all the time, man, we just brought you in here to start the conversation on suicide. So that's, and I'm sure she never told anybody else that story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, well, in California, you got to be very careful, Dr. Darnell, because if I said, Dr. Darnell, I'm feeling a little suicidal. Well, Frank, we have this thing in California called the 5150. We're going to get you a 3-day all-expense paid trip to a mental health facility with no shoestrings or belt, involuntarily. So that's why a lot of times people aren't forthcoming,
Right.
or you're in the military. It can be career limiting depending on who is in charge on base or who your direct supervisor is. Can be limiting in if you're an airline pilot, if you're a physician, if you're an attorney, if you're a veterinarian, if you're a dentist. You got to be very careful who you say those things out, and I think that's a shame. I think if we talked about it more openly, and again, that's something that I come in to give them an opportunity. It's almost like they've been waiting for somebody to mention the magic words depression and suicide to say something.
Right.
A friend of mine who also speaks on this subject said, Frank, I feel like the permission fairy. I got my wand, I mention those words, ding, and they just, emotionally.
So Frank, it's interesting that you bring that up, right? One of the things that I enjoy about the military, me being, like you said, being a psychologist, I'm bound ethically and legally, right?
Yes.
I have a duty to warn, protect individuals and potentially harm those individuals who may have thoughts of harming someone else, right? But in the military, chaplains have 100%, confidentiality.
Yes.
And then so one of the things that we always really recommend individuals do is reach out to a chaplain. If you're having some of these thoughts, reach out to a chaplain because they have 100% confidentiality. But even as a clinician, one of the things that I appreciate is the fact that I understand that, clinical depression, right, one of the symptoms, suicidal ideations.
Yes.
Passive or chronic suicidal ideation.
Yeah, it could be passive. I just want to go to sleep and not wake up.
Right. And being able to understand that and kind of work with patients on some of those thoughts that they may be having is also critical. So it's good to, understand the difference. And one of the things that, I try to explain to patients if they're having suicidal ideations, right? So ideations are different than having a thought with a plan and with the method, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of individuals have suicidal ideations. Doesn't mean that they want to die, right? Can you kind of talk a little bit about that, like the difference between the ideations and as opposed to having somebody with thoughts and with intent to die by suicide?
Yes, and as part of that, Naomi Judd died by suicide. And several people said to me, actually more than several, anytime somebody famous dies by suicide, it seems like everybody I know, Facebook messages me, texts me, calls me. It's like all my friends and family got together and go, well, Frank will know, he's suicidal. So I became the international expert on suicidal people.
Right.
But the question that keeps coming up is why would someone with as much to live for as Naomi Judd want to die? And my stock answer, and again, Dr. Darnell, you can take issue if you like, is that in the majority of cases, they probably don't want to die.
Right.
I didn't want to die. I just wanted to end the pain. Somebody said to me after a keynote, and I told them I put my gun in my mouth. I was practicing. I put the gun in my mouth and pulled the hammer back. It was loaded with federal hydroshock hollow points. There's no coming back. Somebody said to me, what'd your gun taste like? I said, do you really want to know? And he goes, yeah. I said, relief. Yeah, if I could have pulled the trigger and come back the next day and had been out of pain. Yeah, and then ideation. I was in Cincinnati at another engagement. For some reason, I've been in Cincinnati 3 times this year. And the young woman in the audience, after I gave a preview of my talk, grabbed me in the lobby before I could leave, and she goes, "I've been having those thoughts all my life. Is there a medication for that?" I said, "No, there's a medication for depression,
Right.
but I don't think there's a medication for chronic suicidal ideation." I said, "But here's the deal. Those ideations, I've had them all my life, and you don't just because you have it, you don't have to act on it.
Right.
2, I believe it's simply a coping mechanism. It's just the way my brain works. I get stressed. It's a stressful situation. I need a solution, and my brain's like, hey, I've got an idea. You could just kill yourself." I said, it's just a coping mechanism that you just like, it's like option C every time something happens. You could do this, you could do that, or hell, you could just kill yourself.
Right.
So I would encourage you to think of it that way as a coping mechanism. Now, as you said, there's a difference. If you are having someone's having thoughts of suicide, you know what the protocol is. You ask them, "Are you having thoughts of suicide?" Now, there's an old urban legend: you should never mention the word suicide in front of somebody who's depressed. And as a comedian, I love the reasoning because it might give them the idea. Suicide? What a great idea! Why didn't I think of that? Trust me, it crossed my mind. As a matter of fact, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Darnell, actually asking that question out loud reduces the chances that they will in fact die by suicide. But I can see why people would think they wouldn't want to say the wrong thing like that and
Right.
push them over the edge.
Right.
Okay, so let's say that you believe they're suicidal. I would ask them, "Are you suicidal? Are you having thoughts of suicide?" Just like that. And I tell my audiences, I go, "Look, if you can't ask that question, you find somebody who can ask it just like that."
Yep.
And every keynote I do, I put my cell phone number up on the screen. And I go, "Look, if you're suicidal, or if you're younger and you're more forthcoming in text the word help to 741-741. If you're just having a bad day, call a crazy person. Here's my cell." and so I tell her, "Look, if you can't ask the question just like this, are you having thoughts of suicide, and you can't find anybody else to, call me, I'll ask them."
Yeah.
Because I think that, now, you know the protocol, I'm sure. If they say yes, you say, "Well, do you have a plan?" And if they say they have a plan, well, what is the plan?
Right.
And if it's detailed time, place, and method, then ideally you get them to a mental health facility simply for evaluation and perhaps medication. They always ask, when do you call 911 or call the MPs? I say, if they're an immediate danger to themselves or somebody else, you got no choice. And now they may get a 3-day involuntary hold,
Right.
which is very controversial. They're gonna unfriend you on Facebook, trust me. But they'll be alive to be pissed.
Right.
Right.
Now, here's one that I have never heard in any of the. I took QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer. I'm a train the trainer in QPR. Mental health first aid. I'm a train the trainer in mental health first aid. Took the assist training. It's applied suicide intervention.
Interventions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But have never. So a psychiatrist and I were talking one day. I go, well, let's say they got a plan, but it's kind of, I don't know, nebulous. They're not real sure. It's not like they picked out a gun in the barn.
Right.
What do we do? And we chatted about it for a while. We came up with this. You get a plan, but it's not well formed. What do you say? I would say, well, tell me, are you going to kill yourself? And if they say no, you say, okay, tell me why not.
That's right.
Make them give voice, because that can be a turning point, as you know, where you can leverage that.
Right.
Could be family, friends, pets, kids, religion, whatever it is. I'm not a particularly religious person, but what I say is when you are helping somebody with this, you meet them where they are religiously and philosophically. You don't overlay your
Right.
religion on top of what unless they believe they're going to hell if they die by suicide, don't share that with them.
Right.
A guy next door to me, when I came so close, bless his heart, he came over, he goes, you'd gone to hell if you pull that trigger. And I said, hey man, here's what you don't know. I was already there. No, but I'm not particularly religious, but I will leverage whatever I can. So if somebody said to me, I have thought suicide, I got a plan. Well, I said, are you strong in Christ? Oh, yeah. So I go to church Sunday, do Bible study on Wednesdays. I'm very active in the church. I'm strong in Christ. Oh, okay. Have you asked your minister about this? Have you talked to your minister, your chaplain, your rabbi, whatever it happens to be? Okay, well, what do you say that you and I and the chaplain get together and we form a team and we tackle this?
Right.
And then I would say, from assist training, now, can you and I come up with a plan that'll keep you safe just for today? Because when you're that depressed, you're not really, I believe you're not really thinking that far ahead. If it's this bad and it's not getting any better, why bother? That's what worries me about young soldiers, sailors, airmen. I've been through the major depressive disorder cycle so many times. I don't know, I have to explain sometimes to people what the difference between depression and major depressive disorder. Depression is oftentimes situational.
Right.
Major depressive disorder, it's like a wheel with a flat spot. It comes up every now and then.
Yep.
I've been most depressed some of the best times in my life. And my cycle's 3 days. I guess some people last up to 3 weeks. But I've been through it so many times that I know when I start spiraling down that 72 hours later, I'll be flying level again. I stopped fighting it not too many years ago because, opposing it, what I call it is surfing the crazy. Rather than slam myself into the wave,
Right.
I get on the board and I ride the wave because I know in 3 days it's gonna break, and I'll be back. There's a martial art called Aikido, where you don't oppose the force your opponent's throwing at you. You blend with it. You step off line and you blend as the force goes. So I try to blend with the energy because it has a lot of energy, and just move until it, as a friend of mine says, depression is simply a visitor.
Yeah.
It comes and goes at odd times. So, but my cycle's about, they last about 3 days. But again, if you're young and you haven't been through the cycle that many times, then you don't really understand that.
Right.
And I tell young people, look, because a friend of mine educated me. A friend of mine, my best friend from North Carolina, has been living with atypical drug-resistant bipolar for his entire life. And when I finally said to him, I believe I have major depressive disorder, he goes, well, what I want you to do, Frank, is I want you to look back, next time you start spiraling down, look back 24 hours. And then the next time it happens, look back 24 hours and see if there's a common element. See that, he says, you are not a victim of your wiring and your chemistry. There's something triggering. And sure enough, I discovered 2 or 3 things that trigger that.
Yeah.
One of them is disappointing my wife. And when I told her that, she has a wicked sense of humor. I said to her one day, after I did something stupid, are you mad? She goes, no, honey, I'm disappointed.
She didn't say it like that, did she?
She did. And I go, but see, we can laugh about it because I believe when you're comfortable, tell the people you know, love, and trust what your struggles are all about so they can be there for you.
Right. So that's a great point that you put up, right? So Fort Irwin is a rather remote location, right? You got off the
Rather remote?
rather remote, right? You call it the longest cul-de-sac in America, right?
The only place people go less than here is page 2 Google. That's
So our remote location, right? But it's also America's premier training location. However, we get individuals from all over the world here, right? Whether it be soldiers, families. But one of the things that you just talked about, I think is so important, being able to build those bonds, be able to talk to people and share those things, what you're going through, right? What kind of advice would you give to individuals who, say, a new family, first duty station, 19, 20 years old, or even a senior or more senior military family? It's maybe their last duty station, and they've been bottling things up for years from their own culture dynamics or whatever it may be. How do they turn to folks to say, let them know that it's okay to be vulnerable? It's okay to let folks know that you're going through certain things. What was some advice would you give to those individuals, but also some of their leaders? How do you develop those relationships with people who may not be so, prone to open up and willing to open up and let folks know what's going on with them?
Well, as we talked about in the military, depending on who's leading on the post, who your direct supervisor is. I remember there's an Air Force general. I can't remember where it was or who it was, but it was on the day the Air Force was debuting their Operation Resilience, and whoever the leader wasn't enlightened, I don't think, about mental illness, because I believe, forgive the vulgarity I'm quoting, he said somebody who suffered that was chicken shit, and I thought, okay. We need a little remedial education on on mental health. Well, and you know, the military, it fosters a sense of, you know, you work your way through it. You know, you battle through it. You know, you're strong and you're trained and you're. But again, it's a different enemy.
Right.
It's not. It's an invisible enemy. And again, I think if they were encouraged to share with, with the psychologist on post, the chaplain of their particular religion, if they were particularly religious, on post, somebody who, and also there's in Portland, not far, we're about 2 hours south of Portland, they created a veteran suicide prevention hotline, so that everybody who staffs that is a veteran of one branch of the military or other. So the active duty person who calls doesn't have to explain, you know, from scratch why they're concerned, why they're not talking, you know, so they can actually give voice to their concerns. I think if we could somehow train the officers, you know, the whoever's running the post, in this,
Right.
and that it's not a matter of strength or weakness or you know, resilience or character flaw or moral failings, or you're just not tough enough. I think it's a matter of education, and when I speak, roughly a quarter of the U.S. population has a mental health challenge. So I'm speaking to them. That's why I open up with, you know, I put a gun in my mouth, because when I do that, and I say I put a gun in my, you see people with a mental challenge do this. They're leaning in because they think, oh my Lord, this is not academic for him. And the neurotypical people are like, oh dear God. So what I try to do for the neurotypicals in the audience is explain to them, try to decode for them what's going through the mind of somebody who has a mental health struggle, a challenge, so that they can, empathy is a hard thing to come by. You can be sympathetic, which is I feel sorry for you, but to empathize with somebody who's struggling with depression or schizoaffective disorder or whatever, it's, you haven't been there. So I believe it's a matter of education, but then again, the people in charge have to have an open mind about, because there are a lot of, you know, in the military and in medicine and in law enforcement, there are these, you know, we leave this at the door when we come to work. So, yeah, I think a matter of education. The mental health mentalhealthfirstaid.org is they got an 6 to 8 hour class online, and it's just like a mental health 101. Explains, you know, the signs and the symptoms and resources and treatments, and I think I think it's just a matter of education, and it's going to take a while, but the more athletes that come out, you know, the more people who are famous come out, and like the young woman in was it Japan in the Olympics who said, I just can't do the yes, Biles, Simone. Yeah, because there's this thing she did where she has to know exactly where she is in the air at all times, and she was afraid that because of the way she was feeling, she wouldn't be cognizant of where she was. And I mean, she's in the air, and to be brave enough to go, look, I just can't, you know.